thieves. To Duncan's surprise, the thin controller was nowhere to be seen the next day. "Maybe he's arranging to send me away," he thought. Duncan hardly said a word as he puffed about the yard that day. Rusty and Sir Handel were too preoccupied with their own work to notice. But Peter Sam was worried. Sitting in the shed, the little engine began to rethink his attitude towards the newcomer, and felt rather ashamed. That evening, Duncan and Peter Sam were alone in the shed. Rusty was working late with Mr. Hugh on track maintenance, and Sir Handel was stuck shunting at the quarry. The two engines were facing the back wall of the shed. Peter Sam was debating whether he should say something. Duncan was very blunt, and Peter Sam's treatment of him on the school trip may have only stoked that fire more. As he pondered what to do, the night wore on. With a yawn, the little engine drifted off to sleep. Duncan's crew were exhausted after their long day. They had been asked to close the shed doors before retiring to the crew quarters for the evening. They weren't aware of all the quirks of the railway yet. It was customary to double-check the latch on the shed door every evening. If not pulled tightly, it would slide back, and the doors would open slightly. The fireman was so tired and eager to crawl into bed that he didn't check the latch. As they strode away from the shed, it slid back, and the door moved open ever so slightly. The engines, asleep and facing the other way, didn't notice either. The yards were silent, but soon the crunching of gravel filled the air. Two shadowy figures, one short and one tall, were lurking about the yard. Noticing the open shed door, they slipped quietly inside. They took out flashlights and began inspecting the shed.
"What I tell you," said the short one. "Plenty of stuff in here we could make a pretty penny off of."
The tall one snickered.
"Didn't doubt you for a second," he snickered. "We could live off what's in here for months."
The voices had woken Peter, Sam, and Duncan. Neither of them dared to speak a word. They watched as the flashlights danced around the shed. Peter Sam was nervous. He didn't even dare to breathe.
"Say, now we've got some tools," said the short one, "why not nab some parts from the steamers over there? Fetch a good price for us."
The tall one snickered in agreement and began walking towards the engines. Peter Sam's buffers trembled. He glanced nervously over to Duncan and found he was smiling. Duncan winked at Peter Sam before taking a deep breath.
"Who's lurking about in my shed?"
boomed Duncan in an ominous voice. His words bounced off the wall and echoed around the shed. The thieves stopped dead in their tracks.
"You said no one was here,"
the short one snapped. Duncan rallied again.
"Try and bring harm to these engines, will ye?"
The thieves dropped their flashlights and huddled together in fear. Peter Sam silently began to chuckle, which scared the thieves even more.
"We'll show you what happens to good-for-nothing thieves,"
boomed Duncan. As if on cue, a mighty rush of wind slammed the shed door shut. The men were petrified and made a mad dash for the doors. The force of the wind had worked on the old latch as well. Once the door shut, it fell firmly into place, sealing the thieves inside. They balled their hands into fists and punched the doors with all their might, but to no avail.
"Let us out!"
they cried in unison.
"Please, we want to live!"
The noise had disturbed the men sleeping in their crew quarters. They clambered out of the hut with lanterns in tow. At that moment, Rusty and Mr. Hugh arrived. Mr. Hugh jumped from the cab and joined the men as they crept to the doors. The men stood in a line, ready to catch whatever was inside. Slowly, one of them unlocked the latch. The thieves stumbled wildly out of the shed and ran into the arms of the waiting crew members.
"We're just petty thieves," stammered the short one, "and was snooping for loot, but there are ghosts in there."
The tall one shook his head quickly up and down in affirmation.
Ghosts?
Asked Mr. Hugh, scratching his head.
What on earth?
Just then, laughter erupted from within the shed.
They're still in there,
wailed the tall one. The drivers and firemen doubled over in laughter. Mr. Hugh laughed so hard he had to lean on Rusty's buffer for support.
Those aren't ghosts, you fools! Those are our engines!
The thieves went red in the face. They felt very foolish. By morning light, the police had arrested the thieves and taken them away. Rusty, Peter Sam, and Duncan sat outside the shed, talking with the men about the night's ordeal. "Whatever made you think to do that?" quizzed Peter Sam in amazement.
Back in the factory, replied Duncan, we had to deal with thieves on a regular basis. The other engines and I devised some effective ways of dealing with them. He chuckled.
And effective it was, came a voice that made Duncan stop laughing at once. I hear you had quite the night, said the thin controller. It was Duncan's idea, sir, intervened Peter Sam. Those thieves would have stolen from us if it weren't for his quick thinking. Duncan blushed. He hadn't expected Peter Sam to vouch for him. The thin controller smiled broadly. Duncan, I'm proud of you. The vicar told me all about how you saved that child yesterday, and now it seems you're a hero again. You still have a lot to learn, but your actions over the last few days have validated my decision. I'd like to formally welcome you to our railway. The men all cheered and clapped, and Peter Sam gave Duncan a cheerful whistle. Mr. Murphy soon returned to the railway. Duncan apologized for his accident, and the two were now firm friends. Duncan is still blunt and bouncy, as he is that sort of engine. Though he may ignore the advice of the others and think his way is the best, he is grateful to have new friends and a beautiful new railway to call home.